Hello, welcome to this video on oligopoly focusing on collusive practices. So in this video we're going to look at the terms collusion and cartel, the difference between tacit and overt collusion, look at the reasons for cartels and sometimes why they fail. So let's start off with this term collusion. What do we mean by collusion? Well, collusion is an agreement between two or more parties to limit open competition by deceiving, misleading, or defrauding others to obtain an unfair market advantage. In this context, we're talking about the collusion between businesses. It's an agreement among firms to try and limit competition. So perhaps we want to divide up a market or agree prices between us, reduce the level of production, or limit the opportunities for new entrants. Which brings us on to this term cartel. A cartel is a group of producers who are apparently independent, whose goal is to increase their collective profits by either fixing prices, agreeing the prices they're going to charge, limiting, reducing the amount of supply in the market, or maybe other restrictive practices. So a cartel is when a group of businesses enter into collusion. So businesses in a cartel recognize that they're interdependent. The action of one affects the other. And so they act together in order to maximize their joint profits. Collusion lowers the cost of competition. For example, wasteful amounts of money spent on marketing. Collusion can also reduce uncertainty in the market and can guarantee higher profits, increasing producer surplus and shareholder value. Some examples of companies who've been found entering into collusive practices recently. Apple was found to have conspired with 5 other publishers to fix or increase the price of ebooks. Some German retailers were fined or found guilty of fixing the price of Beck's beer. In Australia, firms were found as being part of a cartel involved in fixing prices for laundry detergent. So when firms collude and work together, we often describe it as being overt or tacit. Overt collusion means it's kind of in the open. It means it's been spoken or is a record that this collusion took place. Emails, correspondence, letters, that sort of thing. Often this involves talking about prices, and price fixing is where businesses attempt to control supply and fix price at a level close to what we would expect from if the businesses were acting as a single company like a monopoly. The most famous overt cartel in the world is probably OPEC, and they're an organization we'll talk about in a little bit, concerned with setting prices for oil. Tacit collusion, sometimes known as price leadership, happens when other businesses usually accept price changes established by a dominant firm and which others then follow. So I know that one business here is the price leader, and so I follow their price, I accept their price, I don't try and compete. So really I'm kind of agreeing with them. I'm not really trying to compete. I'm tacitly, implicitly working with you, the other firm. A good example here might be in the petrol industry. In the petrol retailers, we have many suppliers who follow the pricing strategies of the leading firms. So if most firms are moving prices in the same direction, it can take some time for any differences to emerge. We might say that BP is the price leader in the market, and if I've got a small independent petrol retailer, I'm effectively just following their price. We're not talking to each other, but we're colluding, or I'm colluding with you, tacitly. Now, collusion is easier between firms when the government, the regulators, the people who are in charge of monitoring levels of competition in markets are weak or ineffective. If the penalties for colluding, for being anti-competitive and trying to charge consumers higher prices and not competing, are relatively low compared to the gains in revenues or profits. If we have a lot of power within the market, it's easier for us to control supply. So if we have a high market share, this gives us more potential to collude between each other. If I can communicate with the other business and I trust the other business, then it's easier for us to collude. If industry products are standardized, for example, petrol, and output is easily measurable. If brands are strong, then we can collude perhaps even if we're not the only companies in the market, because if we collude between us and we have the strongest brands, consumers might not switch. OPEC is a famous example of a cartel that engages in overt collusion. So OPEC is the organization of petroleum exporting countries. They're basically some of the largest countries that sell oil around the world. And here are the member countries in OPEC. So what these countries do is they account for a large amount of oil production. So roughly half the world's oil comes from these countries. And so they tend to try and fix the supply to maintain a high price. And this is how OPEC would work. Now, in an open market on the left-hand side for oil, we have demand and supply. We would expect a market price of P1 and a market quantity of Q1. But what OPEC do is they say, we're going to limit supply. Effectively, we're going to change the supply curve. And so at Q1, that's going to be our fixed limit of supply. Now, if they fix supply and limit the amount they produce as countries to Q1, the impact here is they can raise a price, raise the market price to P1. Let's now on the right hand side have a look at how this affects an individual member of the cartel. So the market prices become P1. Now these businesses, these firms that operate, these oil producing companies, will have cost curves, the standard cost curve. And then we add in the market price. Now the market price currently is P1. They're maintaining a high market price. Each firm will receive a quota, a limit for them to produce. So this is the quota for a particular firm. And if you add all the quotas together from all the firms in the cartel, then we get to Q1 oil production. Now what does that do for the particular firm? It ensures that the price is greater than their costs. So it ensures for this particular firm that they're making supernormal profits. So this is a profit for a business operating within an oligopoly as a cartel and staying within the quota that has been set for the business. Now you may just have a look at the diagram and say, actually, what if one country here was to cheat a little bit and produce more than their quota? Well, that would start to shift the supply curve to the right, and if firms kept doing that, eventually we'd be back on the original supply curve and back at the original market price. So this only works if firms actually stick to the quotas and agree to limit supply. So what are the costs of doing this in terms of the damage to the economy? Well, from a consumer's perspective, if I'm a person or a business that's buying oil, maybe I make petrol, then I'm damaged because I have to pay a higher price, and higher price means lost consumer surplus. Again, the price here was sustained above marginal cost, so we have no allocative efficiency. It's also going to hit lower income families harder. The cost of petrol rises. It has a regressive impact. The proportion of my income I spend on it is greater. The absence of competition here is also going to affect efficiency. So we're going to more likely get X inefficiency because we don't have competitors. There's no incentive to innovate because we are getting rid of the competition, which loses us dynamic efficiency. Output quotas penalize those firms who want to expand. It's also harder for new businesses to enter the market. They cannot contest the position in the market because the cartel's power is reinforced. They can use that profit to maybe build extra barriers to entry. Now, often we see that cartels break down. Now, why might this be the case? Well, if we think back to our example here with OPEC, if there was falling demand in a recession, for example, falling demand for petrol, this would put a downward pressure on price. So even if they're trying to limit supply, if demand is falling, actually we might get back to a market equilibrium. We did talk about the fact that some product members, there's always an incentive here that if I cheat my quota a little bit, I can increase my profits further. So some members might break the agreement with the rest of the cartel members to limit supply. In many countries, being found guilty of collusion, overt collusion or tacit collusion is illegal, and the competition authorities may implement some penalties. Sometimes it's not possible to stop firms entering the industry. So if a firm enters the industry, for example in the oil industry, the USA have started extracting oil from shale, some sort of pebbly beach sand type stuff, and this has actually increased supply in the market and is undoing some of the effects of OPEC. Now, not all collusion is illegal. Some working together by businesses is deemed acceptable if it contributes to improving the production or distribution of goods, so it gives a wider range of goods to easily make them more easily accessible, or it promotes technical progress in the market. So if we work together to improve standards within the industry, or share information designed to give better information to customers, or research together through joint ventures to promote innovation, then these would not be considered illegal practices. However, most governments feel that cartels are a major barrier to competition. They can lead to significantly increased prices for customers, less output, less efficiency, less innovation, less choice, all of which are harmful to consumers. So governments here do not like cartels. They do not like companies colluding, agreeing things between themselves. So governments can introduce penalties. The European Commission, the US Department of Justice can impose fines. So business found to be in breach of competition law, engaging in collusive practices that are harmful, can face fines up to 10% of their worldwide turnover. Those convicted within a business of a cartel offence can face up to 5 years imprisonment, unlimited fines. They can be disqualified from being the director of a business for a period of up to 15 years, and some of their assets can be confiscated. So there are significant penalties if businesses can be, or individuals can be found to be engaging in collusive practices. This is much easier for overt collusion, much harder to prove if it's tacit. So in this video, we've looked at the terms collusion and cartel. We looked at the difference between tacit and overt collusion, some of the reasons for cartels and how they work and why it's good in terms of generating profits, limiting supply, price fixing, but also sometimes why they fail. That's it. Thank you very much for listening.